Welcome. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm your host, Edward Brown. Our phone number is 888-912-1190. Use that number to answer the trivia questions for a 5-pack tanning certificate given away during the show. That certificate is not sponsored by the radio station, but by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Today we do have a special guest. Jaime Raskulinecz is the founder and CEO of Next Generation Services, LLC, and administrator of self-directed retirement plans in its 21st year this year. She is also the founder and CEO of Next Generation Trust Company, a South Dakota chartered trust company specializing in self-directed retirement plans in its 8th year. The firm specializes in custody and administration of non-publicly traded alternatives within the plans. Well, Jaime, welcome to The Best of Investing.
Thank you for having me, Edward. It's very nice to meet you and happy to talk about whatever topics you'd like.
All right. So why don't you, most of our audience is somewhat sophisticated, but for the ones who aren't, why don't you give us exactly what you do with regard to the self-directed retirement plans, how that differs from non-self-directed plans?
Right. So self-directed retirement plans are kind of a specialty area. Although they have all the same IRS rules and regulations, contribution limits, the difference is that we allow for all of the assets that the IRS allows. We don't just do traditional stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. And as a matter of fact, some self-directed custodians handle those. We only handle the non-publicly traded stuff like private placements, direct investments into real estate, loans and mortgages and those kind of things.
Okay, so if somebody is wanting to do stocks and bonds, they wouldn't use you for that. They would use you for the non-traditional ones.
That's right.
Okay, oh, that's interesting. Okay, very good. All right. What? Let's talk about the different kinds of investments that are allowed, because there's new stuff coming out. Crypto, and you can real estate, and then with real estate you have to be concerned if there's debt on it and that sort of thing.
Well, I'll tell you, the easy way to know what's allowed is by knowing what the IRS doesn't allow. And so that's an easier lift. They do not allow investing in collectibles. And as a wine collector and a wine drinker, I've been trying to figure out a way around that rule for 20 years. There is none, but collectibles are not allowed.
I got an idea. Call it liquid gold, because they do allow gold.
I like
How's
it.
That?
I like it. So collectibles, life insurance, and shares in subchapter S corporations, those are the only 3 things that you may not invest in with a self-directed IRA. Everything else is fair game. And we've seen, common investments like real estate, which is still the most popular asset class we get asked about. But we've also seen some very interesting things like racehorses, cattle farms, tree farms. So you name it, we've seen it, just about.
So racehorses would be allowed.
Yeah, as long as you're not riding it yourself. So as long as you're not the jockey, and probably as long as you don't bet on your own racehorse, because that would be personal gain if it wins, right? Otherwise, if it's strictly investment, it's allowed.
I know, but who's going to own a racehorse and not bet on them themselves?
Well,
that's kind of tough. Okay, but that's a neat one. I hadn't heard that one before. All right, let's go to our first commercial break here. This one's kind of interesting. And again, just a reminder to Jaime, if you know the answer, don't say anything quite yet. Which U.S. state has a park where visitors can hunt diamonds? Which U.S. state? So there's only 50 states so far, so 1 out of 50 will be the correct one. Has a park where visitors can hunt for diamonds. Call 888-912-1190. The first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate. And I do want to make a mention here for Action Whitewater Adventures. They provide the best rafting experience in the North Bay, from beginners to more advanced rafters. Check them out at actionwhitewater.com for rafting trips. Stay with us. You're listening to The Best of Investing. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Jaime Raskulinecz. And our first trivia question, which U.S. state has a park where visitors can hunt for diamonds? What do you think, Jaime?
Well, you know what? I read something about that not too long ago, and I want to say it's Nevada or something like that, but I don't remember.
You would think it would be Nevada. Actually, it's Arkansas.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that. Okay. So, Jaime is the founder and CEO of Next Generation Services and administrator of self-directed retirement plans. How did you get in this business?
Um, you know, more than 20 years ago, I was talking to my financial advisor about investing in real estate with my retirement plan. I had
Yeah.
some investment real estate back then, and he really didn't know much about it. And, he didn't even think it was allowable. He didn't know who did it. And so I did some research on my own and actually never pulled the trigger doing it. But I went to a real estate conference, as I also do some real estate, and I'm a broker in New Jersey. And I met someone who was in this business, and he was looking for somebody to take over a territory for him. He was licensing territories in the Northeast. And I thought it was the most interesting thing I had ever heard about. I was interested in it myself,
Yeah.
pretty recently before meeting him.
Yeah.
And so a few months later, there I was in the business.
Okay. Well, there's got to be all kinds of regulations around this because you're handling people's retirement accounts. So there's all kinds of licensing and all that kind of fun stuff, isn't there?
Well, we started out just as an administration company, and we needed
Okay.
a third party to act as custodian who was either a
Yeah.
bank or a trust company. And so,
Yeah.
what's the one thing that would keep a business owner up at night? Knowing that you need a third party that's not related to you in order to be able to do your business. So it took me a while,
Yeah.
but 8 years ago, I formed the trust company in South Dakota. And so, we have to follow banking regulations in South Dakota. And they have most of the national requirements, in their charter. So yes, we're regulated by South Dakota Division of Banking. And as a
Okay.
matter of fact, we're having our upcoming bank exam again in September. A lot of fun.
Where the regulators come in and make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's, right?
Oh yeah, it's several months of a process to get all the stuff together for them, and then they come on site and really look at everything and go
Okay.
through all your books.
Now, why is this a useful strategy to build wealth for retirement?
Well, most people that come to us use their taxable money to make certain investments that work out very well for them. And
Okay.
so I don't want to beat real estate to death necessarily, but it's a good example. If
Yeah.
you even part time are investing in real estate to make income and you're doing well for yourself and you're making regular income, let's say from rent on a monthly basis, and your assets are appreciating, why wouldn't you want to use the same strategy to build your retirement account? Why
Yeah.
would you want to be constrained to stocks and bonds and mutual funds, of which you may not know as much about as you do real estate? And
Yeah.
so, same thing for folks that have had some success in investing in private equity. Look up Peter Thiel's Roth IRA that grew to millions and millions, and Mitt Romney before Peter Thiel, same thing. So people wondered, they must be doing something shady to do this. No, they're using their expertise to also grow retirement funds in a Roth, which, tax free is a wonderful thing.
Now, most people who let's see here, we have a little time here. Most people who want to buy real estate usually they don't have it all cash. So how does that work if they have to get a bank loan?
Well, you can leverage real estate within an IRA, but it has to be a non-recourse loan. And so most banks on 1 to 4 family homes, the loans are not non-recourse. You must personally guarantee the loan. That's
Okay.
not allowed in when you're using an IRA. So you need to also find then a specialty lender who knows how to do that with an IRA. And there are a few, there's two or three banks that do offer those services. And then anything over four family is generally a non-recourse commercial loan anyway. So as long as they can only go back to your IRA and the property for recourse if you should default, then that's an okay loan to have.
Okay. And then when we get back, because I do want to ask you, actually, you know what? We do have a little time. The thing is, when you borrow money from the bank, doesn't that potentially create UBTI?
It does.
Yeah,
And again, that's a very complicated
sure.
scenario and topic. But one way to get around UBIT is to use a solo K if you're eligible for one, because if you leverage real estate within a qualified plan, there is no UBIT. But the other thing to know is that it's really only the percentage of the real estate that you have leveraged that might be taxed. And so there are also some deductions you can use to offset that tax. I have
Hmm.
never had a client tell me that the responsibility for UBIT meant that their return on the deal was so much less it wasn't worth doing. So
Okay. And don't forget the $1,000 get out of jail free part. That's important. $1,000, $1,000. All
yeah.
right. Hey, we're gonna cut to our next commercial break here. Uh, how much space did the world's first computer occupy? How much space? And we'll give you whoever wins this, we'll give them some wiggle room. You don't have to get the exact square footage. Call 888-912-1190. The first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Also want to make a mention here for Transcendence Theater, and they have some awesome Broadway type shows in Sonoma in the outdoor theater. Always love going to those shows myself. Check them out, transcendencetheater.com, to check out their various show dates. Stay with us. The Best of Investing. I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. One more time, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Jaime Raskulinecz from Next Generation Trust. Our second trivia question: how much space did the world's first computer occupy? Now, it says the world's first computer. They're using the year 1956 for this question. I think computers were a little bit before that, but we're going to use 1956. How much space did in 1956 the world's first computer occupy? How much space do you think that was,
Yeah,
Jamie?
it's amazing. I read that recently too, and I don't remember the space. But I think it was an IBM mainframe, right? And it was like a whole floor of a building or something.
It was 1,800 square feet, which is
Oh, I thought
still
it was
pretty
more than that. Yeah.
Yeah, so 20 they used 20,000 vacuum tubes, 1,500 relays, 10,000 capacitors. I like to say flux capacitors, like in Back to the Future, and 70,000 resistors. And it's amazing because now, yeah, you're
Look
you're
how
holding
far
it.
we've come.
I know. Yeah, yeah. For the audience just listening on the radio, Jamie held up her iPhone, and it's got more than the space shuttle now. So it's pretty amazing there. Um, so, who is a good candidate to use a self-directed retirement plan?
Anytime anyone asks me that, I say anybody that has a job and W-2 income or anyone who's self-employed, regardless of your age. And we've actually been trying to talk more to younger people now because, with the talk about Social Security and what's going to happen with that and with, different benefits being cut, it sure pays to plan early, and as early as he can start socking money away, that's really great. And we do have some young people with very small balances that do some interesting things in order to kind of, build that account up and be able to keep repeating the same investment until they get big enough to do something bigger.
Okay. And is it okay to ask you about how much your services are?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
So it's very reasonable considering that most of this is still a very manual process. So it is $50 to open up an account. It
Mhm.
is $325 per asset per year. and it costs you $100 when you buy and sell an investment. So very reasonable fees. And if you have a small value account, say under $20,000 and you're starting out very small, we have another fee structure that's much lower than that. And I think the fees are under $200 for the
Okay.
first year.
Pretty reasonable. And before I forget, because I want to make sure that the audience knows how to get a hold of you, if they're looking for a self-directed retirement account that they can do alternative investments, how do they get a hold of you?
Best way really is go to nextgenerationtrust.com. And when you go there, it's going to list all of our phone numbers, toll free as well as local. It'll list a generalized email address that you can get. We also have live chat on our website, so you can, during business hours, talk to one of our office staff. So every single way to get us is at our website at nextgenerationtrust.com.
Pretty easy to remember. Let's see here. What are the most popular investments that your clients make?
Real estate and real estate related assets is still really the most popular one. And it can be anything from buying direct hard real estate asset that's deeded directly to the retirement plan. It could be lending money to people in the form of mortgages who want to purchase real estate and they're looking to do it with a non-traditional lender. It can be entities that were formed to purchase real estate, private REITs, private debt credit funds. So all of those things related to real estate are still the most popular. But private equity and private investments and private placements are probably the next most popular one.
Yeah, it's interesting because if somebody wants to do alternative investments, they have to have a company like yours. You can't just go down to, Bank of America and say, "Hey, you guys charge $10 to hold my bank account here and in my retirement. How about holding these assets?" They'll say, "What?" Even
Right.
Schwab can't do that.
Well, there are some custodians that will make exceptions for very high net worth individuals. But even if it's not my company, I caution advisors and other professionals and high net worth people to choose a specialty custodian.
Yeah.
There's been a couple of high profile tax cases in the past few years where advisors and custodians treated a rollover or a transfer of private equity assets incorrectly. And
Oh.
the most biggest profile case cost the James Conn estate about $1 million in tax and
Well,
penalties.
but who was responsible for that, though?
Well, I have to say the advisor had to play a pretty big role in that
Yeah,
because
probably had to play a
when
role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when the two big custodians didn't know what to do, he decided to take matters into his own hands and liquidate the position and rolled over the cash, thinking it was the same thing, which, as you know, is
Oh.
not a good thing.
Not exactly the same thing. All right, let's go to our third trivia question here. Before I do, I wanted to make a mention. Mountain Mike's Pizza in San Rafael, pizza the way it ought to be. You should see. One time I got a pepperoni pizza, had like 100 pieces of pepperoni. Best thing I ever had. Check them out. Mountain Mike's Pizza in San Rafael. All right, our next trivia question here is, what was the city of Boston originally called? Call 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Stay with us. The Best of Investing will be right back. Welcome back to The Best of Investing. Edward Brown here along with Jaime Raskulinecz. I like saying that way. Raskulinecz. All right, our third trivia question. What was the city of Boston originally called? And here's a hint. I don't know how much this is a hint. It was derived from the three hills that characterize the area. Okay, ready? It was called Tremontaine. Tremontaine. And I'm guessing that since nobody could spell it, they renamed it Boston because that's a little easier. Yeah, Tremontaine.
I don't think I've ever even heard of it.
I know. I hadn't either. Okay, you ready? I got some. This is kind of interesting. I was reading like an old Dear Abby type thing, and they were trying to ask like the difference between like socialism, communism, Nazism, capitalism, and they use the example of two cows. So socialism is you have two cows, you give one cow to your neighbor. Communism, you have two cows, give both cows to the government, and they may give you some milk. Fascism, you have two cows, you give all of the milk to the government, and the government sells it. Nazism, you have two cows, the government shoots you and takes both cows. Anarchism is you have two cows, keep both cows, shoot the government agent and steal another cow. And capitalism, you have two cows, you sell one cow and buy a bull.
I love it.
Isn't that great? I really like that. What else do you want to talk about with regard to self-directed retirement accounts?
Well, I would say to people that it is important when choosing a custodian to do your due diligence. When you're choosing investments, either request assistance from a professional who understands the investment that you want to make if it's not something that you're familiar with, and research, and repeat. There are a lot of bad actors out there that will try to get your money. And, one of the ways that they do it is to promise you really big returns. And, the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah.
They also will want to promote a sense of urgency. You're not going to get this deal unless you could do it today or tomorrow. That's a big red flag. So, I always tell people to just slow down, take your time, consider, research everything. Don't be quick to pull the trigger, and use a trusted professional and a trusted specialty custodian that understands the space.
It's interesting too, because if some shyster comes and says, "Hey, you got to act quickly on this," you couldn't even do that with an IRA, because by the time that they send you the documents, I mean, how long does it take the turnaround time if they use Next Generation?
Well, if the account is open and the funds are already in your account, we can generally get something processed within 5 to 10 business days. We have to review the documentation, make sure there's no obvious prohibited transactions. It conforms to our requirements for something that we want to hold. But, if you are just opening an account and you need to transfer or roll over funds from a current custodian, that could take as much as 4 weeks for us to get those funds, because current custodians aren't real quick to process distributions and withdrawals. They don't want to lose
They're
your
good
funds.
at not taking the money, but releasing the money is a little bit slower. It's so funny. That reminds me, this is going back to the 80s, and there was a fairly well-known mutual fund company. And this associate of mine, who was a registered rep, had told his client to, put $1 million into this company's money market fund. It was just a money market, right? Very simple. And when the client needed the money, and back then they didn't have the money markets that had check writing abilities, and this had nothing to do with an IRA, it's just a regular account. When they requested a wire, it for whatever reason, it's like a couple of days go by, another couple of days, oh, we're working on it, blah, blah, blah. And finally, my associate, he talked to the somewhat of a manager, and he said, "Listen, it's been like 2 weeks now, and you guys have not released his money market account to him, the client, right?" And he says, "By the way, what's your name?" And she said, "Sally," right? And she said, "Well, why?" He says, "Because when my client files a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, your name's going at the top. Guess what? The check got wired. It got wired the next day."
I'll bet.
Yeah. Kind of crazy how they take so much money, but they don't want to give it back. I do want to make a mention here. So Pacific Private Money has a fund called the Arrival Fund. It's been around now, gosh, for almost a year. I've been an investor myself since October. It does pay 10%. People say, "Oh, that's too high." Again, the too good to be true. But actually, I mean, it's not, because it's not like they're going to they can't pay you 20% or 30%. It's just what they're doing is making real estate loans to people who want to buy their house, charging them interest and points. Then they take they take the loan and then they sell it to the big boys, Wall Street type companies. They get the money back and turn around and make more points on it. So that's how they're able to pay the clients 10%. It does pay quarterly. They have other funds that pay monthly, but this one pays quarterly. You do have to be an accredited investor. Check them out at pacificprivatemoney.com. Ask about their Arrival Fund. Let them know that you heard about it on the Best of Investing radio show. And again, Jamie, would you give out your information if people are looking for a self-directed retirement custodian?
Sure. Best way to get all of our contact information, depending on how you want to talk to us, is at nextgenerationtrust.com. And also there is a bunch of resources. So when I said research, you can find a lot of that information on our website. And Next Generation Trust Company also has a YouTube channel. And in honor of our 20th anniversary last year, we released all of our webinars and other recordings that anyone can access without a subscription or anything like that. So we have a bunch of resources on self-directed retirement plans, as well as a lot of different assets that you're able to invest in.
All right, audience, stay with us. The Best of Investing will be right back with some closing comments. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Jaime Raskulinecz. No trivia question, but Jamie, what other prohibitions should clients worry about?
Well, the IRS says that your retirement plans, IRAs, 401ks, are to be used for your future benefit, not your current benefit. So there's a lot of regulations surrounding self-dealing, as well as family members that you're unable to transact with. So for instance, I own an investment property, and I think it would be a really good idea to put that investment property in my IRA, and I want to sell it to my IRA. Well, that's not allowed. You can't transact with yourself. In the same vein, if I already had investment real estate in my IRA, I could not rent it to a company that I own or substantially control, and I couldn't rent it to family members, even if it was a market rate deal. So who you may not transact with are your ascendants and descendants and their spouses. So parents, grandparents, and children. But interestingly enough, siblings are allowed. So if you wanted to rent to your brother or your sister, that's perfectly allowable, but you couldn't give them a substantially reduced rent because they're your sibling. And if you didn't like your sibling, you also can't charge them a higher than market rent just because you get more money. So, it has to be a market rate transaction if you transact with siblings. But anything,
Gotcha. Sorry,
anything transacting with disqualified people is not allowed. And prohibited transactions, it sounds like, well, if I make a mistake, what's the big deal? You never want to do a prohibited transaction. Your IRA would be deemed no longer an IRA back to the year that the prohibited transaction happened. So if somebody found it and it happened 5 years ago, your whole IRA is considered distributed. You will pay penalties and interest on that amount of money. And in addition, you will pay penalties for doing a prohibited transaction. So you want to make sure your custodian really knows what the deal is and you talk to them often so that you understand and don't make any mistakes. It's not a pretty thing.
That's a very costly one. Yeah. And if you're under 59 and a half, there's the additional penalty there too, isn't there?
Yeah. So it's early withdrawal penalty, penalties on doing a prohibited transaction. So it could work out to be more than 100% of the value of your account. So it's really a bad thing.
Yeah, that wouldn't be very good. Well, Jamie, again, thank you for joining us. Here's our thoughts for the day. So I've been diagnosed with a chronic fear of giants. It's called fee-fi-fo phobia. And One time this guy tried to sell me a coffin. That's the last thing I need. All right, audience, tune in next week to The Best of Investing. We're going to be giving away more free prizes for answering trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown, wishing you the best of investing. So long.